The rebuilding of Interstate 81 has been discussed and debated for years, and while it may appear to be just a stretch of highway, some consider it to be the biggest thing to hit central New York since the Erie Canal. But as we'll see in a moment, it's quite complicated. We'll get the latest from a man who knows after we welcome you to this edition of Central here on Fox 68 and My 43. I'm Daniel Pluff. Glad to have you with us, and yes, this is a big topic for Central New York, one we've been discussing here at the station for well over a year now, and we're getting closer and closer to some type of conclusion on this, and we're delighted to have someone who knows what's going on and maybe give us a little insight as we welcome to the studio Matthew Driscoll. He's the commissioner of the New York State Department of Transportation, formerly mayor of Syracuse, and even did some time with the federal government on the environmental corporation, it was called?
Right, Environmental Facilities Corporation on behalf of New York State.
Which was tied into infrastructure, of course, right? The financial arm we were talking about.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have you, and I have to start out with a complaint because you are the second most difficult guest to book. My director, Andrew, I've got quite a budget down here. We were this close to sending a black Lincoln Continental after you and just essentially drag you to the studio. But thank you. I know you're all over the place, and that's why. It wasn't for any other reason, but we're glad to have you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Great to have you. So, yes, I want to talk about 81. It's what we've been talking about. We were actually going to kick off this whole Central series on that show way back when. But you're overseeing the whole state of New York. So as I'm sitting here, and I've done, not just for this show, but you're hearing more and more about infrastructure problems locally, statewide, you could argue at the national level even. And my question to kick off, Commissioner, is with all that needs to be done out there, how do you prioritize this stuff? I mean, everything's a major project, it seems, right?
Right. Well, as you rightly point out, yes, I'm responsible for the entire state of New York, and New York is a big state. Mm-hmm. But it's also an old state, like many others in the Northeast. So consequently, our infrastructure is challenged. This is not a new issue. It's something that's been going on for some time. But I've got the good fortune of a governor who understands the importance of infrastructure investment. He has a $100 billion plan going forward. My agency, the Department of Transportation, has a $27 billion budget that we're charged with to go across the state of New York.
It occurs to me none of these projects are small.
Well, we do have small projects.
Okay.
So we don't just do the big projects. Those are the ones primarily that you hear or read about. But we do a lot of small projects across the state with local governments as well.
Right, and this is by no means a criticism of anything you're doing or the states, but I've been reading reports and some suggest that we're dealing with this infrastructure problem, and I say that generally, on sort of a crisis by crisis event, right? A bridge collapses, a dam breaks. It was a classic case out in California. A dam gave way or was going to 200,000 people evacuated. And I read, you'll laugh at me, but I read a report from the American Society of Civil Engineers.
Sure.
Who said, it's my pleasure reading, right? And they said, so many of these structures, highways, waterways, subways, they were built decades ago. And they're in what they call, Commissioner, they're in dire need of repair. Is that an exaggeration?
No, that's a fair statement on a national basis. A part of the challenge has been, until just last year, Congress did not pass a plan. So consequently, states went on a similar program for a decade until finally the FAST Act was passed last year. That's a good thing because not only did it provide the requisite funding to help meet the challenges going forward, but as importantly, it provided opportunity and funding for planning that you need to do. Infrastructure is big work, and it needs to be thoughtfully planned out, and so that it gives us the ability to do that. Now, that's a 5-year plan. Though that 5 years will end quickly. We're already in the second year of that 5-year plan.
In quick, too, there's been some criticism against, in your former life, right, as an elected politician, I should say, that some, and I'm speaking generally, but some of the politicians like to deal with the so-called shiny projects. And, look, you go to a cocktail party, I've been to my share, nobody wants to talk about sewers or highways. They talk about more exciting things, more glamorous things. But now infrastructure is sort of getting pushed up to the front burner, is it not?
As it should be. And the reality is it's the nuts and bolts of how you grow a community, either by retaining commerce or growing it, economic development. You have to have the proper infrastructure to do that. whether it's below ground, which people don't see,
Right.
or it's above ground and roads and bridges and highways. And as I said, Governor Cuomo, he gets it. He understands that we need to make these investments.
He appointed you in this position, correct?
He did. I started in July of 2015. But he gets the connectivity between those investments and how you help grow a region. And so back to your initial question, my charge is across the state. I've got projects in Long Island, in New York City, up through the Adirondacks and all the way to Buffalo and back. So yeah, it's a busy position.
So that's going to be my last question before we get into the nuts and bolts here. Across the state, and we don't need to talk costs yet on the 81. We'll come back to that. But across the state, is this 81 project one of the biggest on your plate right now?
Well, since it's not officially being constructed, we don't consider it, underway. Our biggest program is now the Kosciuszko Bridge in New York City. It's a $550 million new build of an old existing structure, which half was just opened about 2 weeks ago. But when I-81 final project is selected, and when this project begins, this will be a mega project. This will be the largest project in the history of the Department of Transportation.
So I wasn't exaggerating too much when I made a comparison to the Erie Canal? Maybe just a little, but
Well,
in terms of dollars, when you think about
let me frame it this way, that I see it as a transformational opportunity for Syracuse and Central New York. So it's a big decision. There's been a lot of effort that has gone into this, really starting to look at this whole question of the useful life of 81, in particular,
Right.
the viaduct corridor that goes through downtown.
Okay, don't get ahead of me yet now. So, but as much as we're debating this, and it's been there's been editorials written,
Sure.
people are everyone's talking lately about it, and that's only going to increase, I think, as we move along. But in the end, we're really talking about a stretch of highway that's 1.2 miles in length. So in that context, not a big deal, and yet it's a major thoroughfare. I heard tens of thousands of motorists are on this highway every day.
Sure. So in actuality, the project area is about 6.25 miles between 81 and 690. And then the part that most people are familiar with is in the downtown where they cross each other.
Right.
So it's a fairly large project, but it's extremely complicated because you're involving two different interstates. You're involving movement from north to south and east to west.
And you've got both local interest, the state has a say in it. You're dealing with a federal highway system, so there's regulations, I suspect, right?
Well,
Codes.
that's what's driving the project. The current configuration of the interstate system, I-81, is outdated. It does not meet regulation by federal highway. It's much too narrow, no shoulders, tight curves, no sight lines. And I just want to say, it's actually the 5th highest incident rate takes place right here in Syracuse on that component of the highway.
Again, not to tease the issue, but before we get into it all, and this is maybe the first of several dumb questions on my part, but what's the real problem? Not just so much the safety. Is the bridge literally deteriorating and falling apart?
Right. So the problem is, yes, and there are actually 46 bridges in the project area that I just described to you.
Good grief.
Most people don't see those, and of course they're not aware of it. But when you get underneath the belly of this, through the viaduct portions, there are 46 bridges. And so it's a complicated project, but one that I think obviously provides a lot of opportunity.
Does the DOT deem that main highway passage, through downtown Syracuse, do you deem that as safe to travel on currently?
Well, for those of us that use it on a daily basis, we're used to it, but for those that do not, it's challenging, particularly if you're, let's say, coming from Camillus into downtown.
But structurally, you're still okay. It's not like the cement.
It's not going to fall down tomorrow.
Okay.
And I think that's some of the things when people understood it's the end of the useful life. We've maintained it over the years. We just did some deck replacement last year. But at the end of the day, the question becomes, do you want to put another $800 million into that existing structure, or do you want to do something different that also, most importantly, meets the safety requirements of federal highways?
So here we go. So let's get into, there's essentially three, and you can elaborate, but essentially three options as I get it. that are being discussed. We'll show this on screen. But a bridge, the replacement of the bridge, the viaduct option, essentially fix or tear the bridge down, replace it, et cetera. Pros and cons on that we'll talk about. The so-called boulevard option, where traffic, as I understand it, Commissioner, is rerouted around Syracuse and makes for a nice grassy area in the city. Or this third option, which I thought was off the table, we'll come back to it, the so-called tunnel option. Literally, tunnel as we think about it, or maybe even a depressed highway. We'll talk about all three. Let's begin, frankly, just with the so-called viaduct, the bridge option. Pros and cons there. What's good, what's bad about just replacing the bridge?
So that option is called the viaduct replacement. And
Yep.
essentially what it means, to simplify, is you would just rebuild that viaduct in its current place. Again, when I talked about regulations, though, that means you have to build it wider and straighter. And therefore, you would be taking a lot more property off of the tax rolls of the city of Syracuse. That's something that I've been very cognizant of since I arrived in this position, and that I've worked hard to minimize.
It seems to be, as I've read things, it seems to be a natural way of fixing things, but it's also very much hated. You know, you read the editorials, you read what people are saying. Nobody seems to like that project. Does that make sense?
Well, I think that, look, and I've been around government a long time, as you point out. The reality is it's tough to always get people on the same page.
You're never going to do that.
No.
You know that,
and
right?
the fact of the matter is people don't like change.
Yeah.
But having said that, you know, this is a time and place where, A, we're mandated to, because we have to rebuild this system to meet federal highway requirements. It's a problem area, lots of accidents there.
Yeah.
When I was mayor, we had police cars up there all the time.
Right.
But we also have to do it in a way that does that in a more thoughtful approach without devastating the city of Syracuse as well.
Okay, and I'll end with, so of the three options though, and again, this is just based on what I've read. What do I know about rebuilding a highway? But it seems to be that this would be the most disruptive in terms of, I read an estimate, Commissioner, 35 different buildings would have to be taken down, some of which are historic.
That's correct. So we actually had about 5 different variations of the viaduct replacement. We settled on one, which we can talk about later, which is in the DEIS. And that would take about 25 buildings. The other 2, you know, are still, of course, also being considered as well, which is the community grid.
Yep.
And now the underground options,
which we're going to get to next. But one last thing, as I was preparing for the show, people talked to me about this, and it was a kind of a recurring question from a couple of people. And I have to admit, it's a good question for me to ask you. But one of the criticisms of the whole bridge approach is, well, you know, it separated parts of the city. It separated certainly the hill from downtown and all of this. And you know, there are those that say, well, you know, you can drive under this thing, you can walk under this thing, you can ride your bike under it. I mean, it's not exactly the, you know, Trump's Mexican wall. It's penetrable, right?
Right.
Do you agree with that, or is
I think a new redesign could make it more pedestrian friendly, could make it more inviting as it stands now.
Aesthetically, could you make it prettier?
Sure, you can do anything. But the reality is right now, as it sits right now, it's less than inviting. Some view it as a safety issue, not in terms of just traffic, but for pedestrians. It really does prohibit, because of the at-grade crossings, the opportunity to grow the University Hill area, which is by far the fastest growing segment of the city of Syracuse's economy, with a lot of future ahead of it.
The next option, we could talk, I'm sure, a show on the bridge, but you know, they only give me 30. Can't you talk to them? I need an hour. So, but let's talk this so-called boulevard option. And this seems to get a lot of praise from people. It's a pretty approach. And again, if you could describe it, but we're rerouting traffic all around the city as I get it.
It's called the community grid. And essentially what it would do is it would, from the south end of the city, it would drop 81 down to an at-grade street level and come right into the city of Syracuse. Traffic would be rerouted using the existing 481 north that, as I said, currently exists there. But the idea behind the community grid is to take the traffic from 81 and push it onto city streets. So thereby, with traffic, you can ignite more economic development. You can use the existing street grid. There will be upgrades will need to be made in certain areas. but it's a way to really drive growth as well. So on the community grid, that's what that project in general is about, bringing it down, and it ties into a lot of the work that's taken place over the many years here with bicycle, pedestrian lanes, and other forms of movement.
But you know, and maybe I've got it wrong, and I'm not being funny with you, but you know, they've made the comparisons like, you know, Erie Boulevard and what. I've driven down Erie Boulevard since I was 16. I've never seen anyone cross on foot. You know, you don't see pedestrian traffic on, and it occurs to me, if you've got 81, you know, people, it's a major, as I said earlier, major thoroughfare. Are you going to have pedestrian traffic on this boulevard approach, do you think?
Sure. It would be alongside of it. As you see now in downtown Syracuse with the connective corridor as a small example. Right. But let me say there's an important distinction. So if you look at the traffic flow that comes from the north, let's say from Binghamton, heading from the south heading north, and from the north heading south, 88% of all of that traffic's final destination is in the city of Syracuse. 12% keeps going either way. So the large users of this system end up in the city of Syracuse. Why? Because they go to work in the University Hill area, or they go to work into the downtown area, or if they're coming, you know, from the north, they end up perhaps at Destiny or the hospitals. So it's a point of destination for the majority of the users that use the interstate system.
There's a complaint that still runs, I hear, in the Skinny Atlas area, where you know, you've got these tractor trailers that still go through the village. They don't want. I think they want to avoid the throughway or something like that. So how would you enforce the through traffic? You know, and I'm surprised at that number. The 12% you say that maybe are going from Binghamton to Watertown. How would you enforce that traffic to go out of their way, essentially, and bypass the city?
Well, they would be utilizing, as an example, if they were coming from Binghamton, they would use the 481, right?
Right, but could you enforce that?
Well, like, remember, our ability, we cannot enforce interstate commerce, but what we do, and you referenced Seneca Meadows, and that's the point, and it's a good point from the folks in Skinny Atlas, because trucks take that highway to get to Seneca Meadows to dump their trash. But in that example, they are permitted and they can only stay on the interstate system. So we issue permits, and so by doing so, that's how we ensure that truck traffic stays on the interstate system.
Right. Quickly, in as much as, you know, you certainly have a concern for the businesses and the shoppers, anyone, you know, wants to come into downtown, you've also got 4 major hospitals essentially utilizing that Adams Street, exit. That has to work into your thinking, because I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say it could be a life and death situation. You need quick access to those places, correct? It's
gone into the thinking on all of the options that we've studied, and we've studied 17 of them. Oh. So for every option,
now I really need an hour with you.
for every option, Dan, the critical points, particularly the hospitals, has always been at the top of the list. So that same consideration, regardless of the project, viaduct replacement, community grid, or tunnel underground options, all of that planning is in those projects as well.
Tunnel option next. And again, there's more on all of these, I get it, but so this was one which I thought, Commissioner, was essentially dead in the water. All of a sudden, I'm reading that's back on the table.
Well, let me tell you why. So I mentioned the 17 options that we had previously studied, and that included also underground solutions, tunnel, a depressed highway, which think of as a moat almost, and all of those were dismissed. There's 2 options that right now are in the draft environmental impact statement. That is the community grid and the viaduct replacement. Now, how did we get to the tunnel? Our state delegation, wanted more information relative to the costs associated with a potential tunnel. The governor announced that we would do that. So we went out and we secured the services of a global tunnel expert to take an independent review and analysis of the tunnel options. And they are looking at 4 options. There's a tunnel option, a tunnel with a community grid, a depressed highway, and a depressed highway with a community grid.
Good grief.
So they're going through all of that study and analysis now. We expect by the end of July into August we'll have a result.
The depressed highway struck me as an interesting one because it's almost the best of all worlds. You know, it keeps that north-south, south-north traffic moving. It allows for something kind of like the boulevard approach, but maybe more practical. I mean,
the difference is it doesn't spread traffic out onto the city streets and have better access into the University Hill area. As you say, it's a through thoroughfare from south to north, or vice versa. So it doesn't disperse the
doesn't it
traffic.
alleviate that concern some had that, you know, it makes for a more openness down there? You know, the bridges can be a little intimidating. I get that.
Right. Well, it would do that, but it would still be kind of a divide, right?
Yeah, sure.
So you'd have to build bridges over the top.
Pedestrian type bridges or
And automobile to keep those important east-west connections. You know, one of the things that we need to make sure, I mentioned economic development, is making sure that we're keeping east, west, south for central. You know, a lot of folks get to work in the University Hill through those east-west connections.
Right.
And it's important that we make sure we not only maintain, but we enhance connection opportunities.
There's with any of these options, I'm sure, and I'm positive, you look at how to maintain these. So does one of those options strike you as being easier to, I mean, salt, you know, I think, oh my gosh, you know, now that it's, you know, we're getting into some weather, in the winter you see the salt stains and all that. But is one option over another just from a maintenance perspective an easier one?
Sure. I mean, we're going to use salt regardless of you know, whatever project is selected,
24,
right? But you know, as an example, with say a tunnel option, you know, you've got ventilation that you would need to install and maintain.
But the state has some good history with tunnels. You know, it's certainly downstate, right?
And you would need to maintain the high water table. We live in a city that has a high saltwater concentration, so it's got to be pumped 365.
Well, there you go. I mean, I keep referencing the Erie Canal. You know, I worry that on some of these like tunnel or depressed, are we going to hit a water table?
Well, if it's well, look, you don't have to go too far underground to hit water. Having said that, that's part of the analysis, you know, that the consultant is looking at. They will look at all of that. That'll all be factored in to a final number, and as the department's already done. So I want to be clear, no, there's been no final project selection, but this is part of it. Department of Transportation whittled it down to the two that I mentioned in the DEIS, the viaduct replacement and community grid. We are now absolutely having looked at independently the tunnel and depressed highway options that I referenced, and so when those are all done, we will take all that information and we will review it.
All three options, though, address the concerns you raised earlier in terms of safety factors and modernizing, if you will, the highway to a, right?
That's right, absolutely. You know, we have some of the highest accident rates anywhere, particularly when where 690 and 81 merge, and kind of that whole can of worms, if you will. Very tight ramps, short ramps, tight turns, no shoulders. It's a big problem.
I'm not cutting you off, but I am for time. So here goes. You say I've saved the best for last, right? Not cheap.
Not cheap.
What are we talking?
What is?
What's your What is? You know, best estimate so far. I mean, are we into the B word? Billion?
We're well past the B word. So just I'll give you the numbers. Community grid was estimated construction about 1.3 billion. Viaduct replacement, construction about 1.7 billion, and we arrived at a number of nearly 3 billion for the tunnel option. But again,
3 billion for the tunnel option.
3 billion. But again,
excuse me, but cheaper to do the depressed highway probably.
Similar O&M issues.
What's O&M?
Operation and maintenance.
Thank you.
You know, the high water table pumping. Obviously, there's no ventilation there. But I mentioned you'd have to cross kind of the depressed highway. So to have the same connections to the University Hill area and keep that important east-west access open, we'd probably have to construct another 8 to 10 bridges. And when you look at the bridges you build, then you've got to maintain those over the next 50, 60, 70 years.
I don't envy your job. My good friends at the Erie Canal Museum.
I like my job.
I know. Listen, good for you. My friends at the Erie Canal Museum said that they're celebrating an anniversary, the canal now, but
Yeah, that's right.
State allocated like $7 million to build the canal. I can't do the inflation number, but it sounds like
Right.
this is going to be a more expensive project, when you account even for inflation. But one thing they said to me was in the first year of operation, the canal was able to pay the state back because of fees and tolls and all that. This is not a throughway.
It's not a revenue road.
This is not a revenue road. So where does the money come from? Does the state float bonds for that? Where does
The
it all?
state taxpayers. Some of the money will also come from the federal government, but the state taxpayers will obviously be a part of that.
And you mentioned a figure earlier, $100 billion that the governor has, I guess, allocated, correct, for infrastructure?
He has a $100 billion plan that's in place now.
So there's money there, in other words, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, we'll have to make sure that we figure out how we stage it. Whatever we do, we're looking at probably 5 to 6 to 7 years worth of construction. And so, and you're a finance guy, you get it. So we're going to stage our financing annually rather than have to front load it all, that annually we can do that over a 7-year spread. And that makes it a little easier because we also don't want to take away from other important work that we have to do across the state of New York.
I had Dr. Neil Murphy sitting in that chair. We talked the consensus program. He's the nicest guy, by the way.
He's a good friend of mine.
But he was adamant, saying, we want public input on this whole consolidation of services here. Realistically, Commissioner, does the public have a say in this? Does it all come down to numbers and practicality?
Oh, the public definitely has a say in it. We've had, all told, over the many years, over 200 meetings. But we've had, and people may be more familiar, some recent large meetings. We did a shred up on North Salina Street. We've held them, at the convention center downtown. And we'll continue to do that, by the way. So it's also mandated by the federal government that you have public participation.
Right.
So yes, we do that, and that'll continue.
You do understand that this is, I'm telling you what you already know, that this is going to be a no-win, because whatever option because people are so divided on this, whatever option you come up with, there's going to be a segment of the population that's going to hate it. You have to get around that somehow, right?
You know what, my thinking is we have to make a decision. I'm more inclined to make a decision and move forward.
Yeah.
And I think it's really about people, whatever the final result is, people getting used to a new way. People don't like change. So even if it means that they've got to drive 3 or 4 minutes out of their way, they don't like that.
Right.
But I think that dissipates over time.
So you mentioned, if I heard you right, you mentioned once, I hate that term, shovel in the ground, but once you get underway, 5 to 7 years of build time?
Yeah, a community grid is estimated to be about 5 years of work. A tunnel would be, probably 8.
Okay, and this is
viaduct replacement would be 6 or so.
And I know we do your best here. This is not we're not going to roll the tape back a year but if everything goes well from this point on, at what point do you think you can make an announcement and say this is what we're going to do?
Well, I hope that we're in a position to be able to make that announcement into late this year.
Late 2017.
To make a project selection. Once that is done, once a final project is selected, we then do a couple things. One, we start focusing on final design.
Yep.
That'll take a year and a half at a minimum. We also start to build out our financial plan in conjunction with Federal Highway. So there's kind of parallel tracks here that we would do once a final project is selected. And there are a number of steps still yet to go on that.
Will you get further along? Will you come back and talk to us?
I'd be happy to.
We'll also value your opinion. You can visit us at foxsyracuse.com. Send us some emails on this show, questions, concerns, complaints, or anything you'd like to hear from us. We do read all the emails, and we appreciate hearing from you. Again, this is another, it goes like that kind of situation. I'm delighted to talk to you now. I do hope we can get you back in here, Commissioner, as we move along. Good luck with the program, of course. And again, you're saying all goes well, hopefully a selection by year end.
This year.
At best case, right?
Right.
And then maybe a year and a half, 2 years of design work before we can really start to see something happen.
That's correct. And I want to end by saying, again, people need to remember this is a mega project. It is not just the section of I-81 through downtown Syracuse or even 690, There's a lot of planning that goes into something like this, and coordination as well. We'll be working closely with the county and the city, whatever project is selected, because there will be disruption. There's no question about it, but we will do that in a way that allows traffic to keep flowing and makes sure that the safety of the drivers continues to be maintained.
Thank you very much.
Great to be here.
That's it on the 81 project for now. From all of us here at Central on Fox 68 and My 43, I'm Daniel Pluff. Thanks for watching.